Sir, streaming is started, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Really like your scenery, Mr. Balram.
Huh?
Like-
I'm sitting on a beach.
Yeah, I see your flat is near the beach, so you have recreated that here. Huh?
Huh?
Moved it to Bangalore.
Yeah, he has moved
Yeah,
the beach
a
to
beach in
Bangalore.
Bangalore. Yeah.
Satya, I've been looking forward to your talk, Satya. I was in consulting for many years.
This Anu Oza was.
Forward to your questions. Yeah.
Sorry?
Look forward to your questions.
Yeah, I will type them in the chat box. It's a very challenging environment in which to show leadership, right? So it'd be very interesting to hear what you have to say first.
Mr. Balraman, shall we go ahead?
Yeah, let's
Just
go.
6 o'clock. Yes. Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, very warm welcome to another edition of our evening talk. This is especially special for MMA because this we are doing with the Ponds veterans under the guidance of Mr. Balraman, who is a past president of MMA and also a mentor and well-wisher of MMA. So we have been able to bring you some outstanding speakers around the world to come and speak to you, share the first-hand insight with you. It's a great opportunity for each one of you. I'm quite sure we have tremendous interest shown for this talk by way number of registrations which has come through. I know the large number of viewers who are also watching the program live on YouTube, Facebook, and also this time we are also gone live on audio. That means there's a live streaming. You can just plug in any part of the thing. You need not even have, you can just listen to what the speaker is going to be speaking to you. You can even send your questions by just sending your SMS. Now, before I call upon Mr. Balraman to take forward thing, let me quickly, 1 or 2 minutes, I'll tell you what's happening so that you, if you by any chance missed it in your inbox, because many of you don't really see all my mail because too many mails are coming from MMA. We're also finding a solution for that. We are using technology, how to connect with you, how to connect with, we are going to really use the intelligence to see what your interest and send you more of those information. We are working quite a bit on that. You will find a lot of change very soon. Now coming to 28th, that is on Friday, the coming Friday, we have an interesting talk by Professor Dr. Narasimhan. He is a senior respiratory physician from Apollo Hospital, Chennai. He's going to, the theme is Ask Me Anything, COVID-19 and healthcare, because a lot of doubts amongst the people. We listen to so many doctors. Here is a doctor who has really actually worked on this and also worked on with many of the senior VVIPs and many of the people so that he'll be able to ask. So please keep your questions ready. If you have a question, you can already share it with him. It's happening at 6 o'clock in the evening. And yeah, because this is a interest which has come from all our chapter members. That's the reason we organize this. The chapter members are located at Namakkal, Lee Road, and Pondicherry, Puducherry, and Trichy, all these places. Then we have an event on the Friday, the 21st, we jointly with Equator, brand value management series, where the governance, Sailesh Arbatti, one of the leading chartered accountant, the past president of Institute of Chartered Accountants India, will be talking to us on governance. And Ramesh Jude Thomas is the president of CEO of Equator, will be delivering the keynote address and set the tone. Again, I'll only talk about what Ponds veterans is going to be already finalized in the month of August. Saturday, the 1st of August, we have Mr. Rajiv Batra. He's going to be talking to us on creating brand coolness and brand love, how to make your brand stronger. And he's going to be joining us from University of Michigan from USA. It's happening at 6 p.m. on Saturday. Then on 4th of Saturday, on the 4th Tuesday, we have another internet man. So you can see the mail. We'll connect with you later. Then on the 5th, we have Sridhar. He's going to be talking about I am not creative. Now, I want to only remind you one more speaker who will be talking to us from the Ponds veteran. That's on Saturday, the 8th. Mr. Kannan. Mr. Kannan is a business mentor, former MD of Adidas, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, and he's going to be talking to us on the Leader Speak series, consumer centricity and the value in and skincare to sportswear, to smartphone, now to social sector. I think it's going to be a very, very interesting event to listen to Mr. Kannan, who has been heading the Adidas. Adidas means coolness. So you all know, so you can come and listen to him. And coming to today's talk, which is going to be very inspiring, interesting, and I'm quite sure you're all eagerly looking forward to. And at least in MMA, we firmly believe, and Mr. Balraman knows, we believe always in collaboration, partnership. Our survival is only with that, actually. But he's going to be talking much more than that. Leadership lessons from working in a partnership environment. And the speaker for this evening is Satyanarayan Ramamurthy, partner and head of infrastructure, government of healthcare, KPMG, Singapore. Will be talking to us. And today, I know Mr. Balraman really doesn't need an introduction to this August group, but there are a large number of viewers who joined us on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and multiple forums. For their benefit, quickly introduction of Mr. Balraman. His education from Indian Institute of Management is master's, BTech from Anna University. He's been a corporate directorship of one of the best companies, anything you name it, he was there. And he is also very closely connected with a number of other activities. In fact, devoted to human development, created a brand HR software called Adrenaline when he was there. Then he also enjoys coaching, mentoring leaders, helping build brands, consulting on marketing through boardroom advantage, many more initiatives. And this is a very short brief about Mr. Balraman, because if you have to read out his profile, is quite substantially. It will be an envy of many who read his profile that we want to achieve and emulate him. We should do that. Mr. Balraman, over to you to introduce the speaker and the subject, please. Mr. Balraman.
Thank you, Group Captain. If I may blush to your introduction. When I met Satya, and he said that he is both a chartered accountant and an MBA, it was a bit difficult for me to believe that, because Satyanarayana has a lot of laughter in him. He is very relaxed. He smiles a lot. And my impression about chartered accountants, mainly drawn from my wife's side relatives, is that they are very serious people and they do not laugh, they do not joke. So Satya is a rare breed there. And he's not just a chartered accountant, he's also a finance MBA. He represents KPMG. Satya, what exactly is KPMG? Is it Krishnan, Parthasarathi, Muthuswamy, something like that?
Well, it stands for Kleinwell, Piet, Mavic, Wodala. But, as KPMG, I can write it or I can say it, but I can't pronounce it.
I see. Okay.
But just in a lighter vein, some of my colleagues over the years used to say it also means you can keep playing more golf when you become a partner.
Wow. True. Nothing like golf, right? Okay. Actually, Satya has a very, very unusual and interesting topic, something that will engage your gray cells, that will give you a lot of stuff to think about and debate, and he's open to that, because he too is very curious. How exactly does his system of partnership work? Most partnerships do not work, and incidentally, marriage is also a partnership. Now, let me quickly move on, having said that. There are many partnerships. Consultancies like McKinsey are partnership. Many venture capital firms are partnerships. So there are lawyer firms which are partnerships. So how do partnerships work? If all partners are equal, then why should anyone obey anyone else? We are very curious about this. So Satya, why don't you set the ball rolling, and we will ask you questions as we go along.
Thank you, Mr. Balraman. Let me just load up my slides. Can you see it now?
Yeah, we can see it. Yeah.
Okay, so I can't see myself. Okay, that's it. So
you are being seen by everybody. Yeah.
First of all, thank you to Mr. Balraman, MMA Group Captain Vijay Kumar for this opportunity. Preparing for this talk has really sort of pulled me into areas which I never thought I would go into, primarily because for the last 26 years, I've not had to write my CV or try and dig deep into what I've learned, because I've never had to look for a job. So effectively, this has really tested my wits, if I may put it that way. And so what I'd like to do really is to share what I have learned over the years, and then have a good discussion with some of you on how this might be relevant. And when we use the word partnership, I mean, we use it loosely, but I think in this case, it's actually a group of people coming together with a collective goal, and they want to achieve it in the most efficient way. So that's a very simple way of describing it. If I move on to the next slide, I want to provide a bit of history and context. But before I do that, I should not forget that when I worked in bonds in the early 90s, it was a corporate, it was a partnership actually clothed in the form of a corporate. Because when I later on came out and actually worked in a partnership, it felt that a lot of things I learned in bonds seemed to be happening, in the partnership environment. So you do not have to have a structure which is under the Partnerships Act or whatever you call it, for it to actually function as a true partnership. But in a very simple way, and I know many of you have come from families in India. A partnership is like a Hindu undivided family, right? Actually delivering a business mission with all its, kind of warts. One uncle may not like the other uncle, but they still end up having to work together to deliver what they're supposed to. So I'll provide a brief history because I think we need to set context before I go into what I've learned. Otherwise, you may not be able to relate to the specific points. But primarily, partnerships where knowledge is the real capital, rather than machinery or physical capital. And as Mr. Balraman mentioned, it's been used in investment banking. Did you know that Goldman Sachs, which started off as a sole proprietorship in the 19th century, was one of the early partnerships, and it remained a partnership for a very long time until it was listed, as a company. And we can come to that. So, why partnerships sometimes get listed. So they cover audit, tax, legal, consulting, engineering services. And partnership environments happen often in areas where there is what we call, personal liability of the professionals. Because, and this is, you may be surprised, but engineers who certify buildings have a huge personal responsibility should anything happen. And I've been trying to validate this, but I remember reading somewhere that in the US, somebody certifying a bridge, even until the early, part of the 20th century, had to live under it for a period of time in order to make sure it didn't fall, or they took the responsibility for its fall. And that actually dates back to something called the Hammurabi's Code, which is an old Mesopotamian king who said, a king of Babylon, who actually made a code. It's a set of laws where he actually said that if somebody built a house for somebody and the house fell during the person's lifetime, the builder would be put to death. So it is professional liability is a serious issue, and it still is a huge responsibility on individual professionals. So pooling that risk becomes an interesting opportunity for people to share, but it's also, of course, then pooling the returns, right? Because as we've seen, there's ups and downs in business, and if you are a collective, it becomes easier. Now, this has evolved in organizational and legal form to LLPs or private limited companies, but the characteristics still remain as partnerships. So we should not confuse the legal form from the cultural and organizational method, right? And same way, some partnerships have got listed. That's complicated things a bit, because you then introduce public markets into play. And then in many of these cases, you have a question of who provides the capital and who provides the knowledge, and how are the returns to knowledge shared, and how are the returns to capital paid for, right? So that's, and they've mostly gone because they've wanted to allow these partners to encash some of their so-called capital and goodwill. The other interesting fact on partnerships, and again, this is something many of you may not know, is many of the successful partnerships have lasted, 2 or even into 3 centuries. So, KPMG has been around since 1818 in various forms, of course, but they've all gathered into one big firm. Deloitte has been around for 175 years. And GE, I last read, was 150 years. And, obviously, they have their challenges now. So these groups have something to them which suggests that there is a formula which has worked. And somebody at the start did say that there are challenges, and we can talk about how these will be dealt with going forward. The last point I want to make on context is an interesting one, and that is, the chairman of one of these big 4 firms, actually they don't get paid a hell of a lot of money. I don't have the exact numbers, but it's less than 30 to 50 times the median pay of these organizations. And I just looked up the top 50 companies in Bloomberg and what the pay of the chairman or the CEO chairman was as a pay of the median pay, and they've ranged from anywhere from 200 to 800 times the median pay. So that's an interesting aspect about the flat structure. And corporate overheads, because these are run, many of them are run as strong networks, the corporate overheads are very, very low. So one of my colleagues in a very large oil multinational company told me when I was telling him that in the COVID world, we're beginning to see some very interesting global meetings, which are happening very regularly between ourselves and our global colleagues. And he said, don't go down the way of some of the very large companies where global meetings are organized primarily as a way of showing power rather than as a way of adding value to your business. So that was an interesting aside, that corporate overheads sometimes don't add value. So that's a bit of context. And why is this relevant to this audience? Because I'm sure many of you are working in companies. Many of you are possibly senior people from organizations. You may have retired, you're on boards and so on. And I will put it to you that as I go through the next sort of 30 or 40 minutes, the key question for you to think about is, most of you are really knowledge workers, ultimately. It's just that in your careers, you've traded your knowledge for a certain career in a corporate. Many of you are now maybe out of a career, you're advising on your own, personally or otherwise. And the question for you to think about is doing this on your own a good idea? If you were to do it as a collective with a bunch of people, what are some of the things you should be thinking about? How can you make the most of your knowledge through a collective? There is, of course, huge challenges around ego and other things, but there are huge opportunities as well. So that's one group. The other group is people who are mid-career, people who are working in jobs. And I would ask you this question: is there something missing in your life? If there is, then think hard about what you might do with this talk and how it might help you think about a different alternative future. So let me move on to my, sorry, I must go back now. Okay, so when I started my career in a partnership environment, this was in the mid-90s. Before I proceed, I must make another acknowledgement, and that is that I had a pretty lousy bunch of slides. And then I asked my son to work a little bit on it because I really had no time. So I must acknowledge that for Pratyush, because I've not violated any labor laws here because we have no minimum in Singapore. But I just wanted to say that. And of course, in all of this, the most important thing is the fact that if the younger professionals and people and students begin to understand how these organizations work, I think you can make a lot of your careers. So moving on, what is one of the first things which struck me in a partnership environment? It's that the autonomy that you get is heady, right? And I think this was the bit I took away from bonds when I was a young management trainee, not even a manager, in 1990. The amount of autonomy we had in doing things and actually proposing ideas, getting them executed was remarkable. Now, since then, I only saw it in in my firm in KPMG, and that was because this is the core of the business philosophy of most partnerships. They have to leverage the entrepreneurship at the partner level to succeed, and that's actually because there's a strong link between effort and reward. Now, the thing I realized is that most people have this in them to actually make use of it. But if through great bureaucracy and through controls and processes and efforts to stifle innovation, you lose it in the people who start off this way, it's actually quite hard to reignite. And that's something which not just partnerships, but corporates need to seriously think about in today's environment when you have more and more controls, concerns about governance and so on. Because governance is no kind of, shall we say, silver bullet for performance. So that's one point to keep in mind. But let me also say that when I was just a senior consultant, not even a manager in my firm in 1996, I put out a business case to set up a new business area because I said we hardly had a consulting business in Singapore. We wanted to go in and build out a large performance consulting business. And within a day, I got approvals to do it, to get on with the thing, and I was not even a manager. Now, that would be harder to do in today's environment, even in my firm, because we were then just a small number of partners. We're over 100 partners now, and there's a certain process. But please note that the form only changes, the substance doesn't. And as long as we understand that, and this is true in many environments, the form changes, but the substance doesn't, because if you are able to, convince the leadership about what needs to be done, you will get, the check to move on. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. And that brings me to the next point. More often than not, you have more autonomy than you think. Everybody is looking for a ghost when they are concerned about what decisions they might take. And if you have the ability to reach out a bit more than you otherwise thought, you may achieve more than what you could. So that's been my personal experience in getting out of the comfort zone, because it's very comfortable to not have autonomy. It's very comfortable to not, to take orders from somebody and then say, I failed because you gave me the order. So it's about how do you use the autonomy with some personal risk. And now you'll say, oh, it's easy for you to say this, you've done this for a long period of time. But I'll share two more lessons from a personal point of view on how this works. And the first one is you preserve autonomy by delivering results. As long as you deliver results, people, your leaders and who you work with will continue to give you the autonomy. But how do you deliver results? How do you perform? And that brings me to my next point. You need a portfolio of activities, because nobody can guarantee success all the time in everything that you do. You will have to have a bunch of risks put together where some may do well and some may not. And I've heard many times my colleagues coming and complaining, I don't understand how this firm works. I've tried my best for 6 months. I've done these 5 things. And when I go and drill into their portfolio, they are doing 5 things, all of which are in the so-called invest mode. if you are only going to be making investments, how do you must either have a strong conversation before you do that to say, I'm going to look at a 3-year journey, year 1, year 2, year 3 years, what I'm going to do. But many people don't have the courage to have that conversation because they're concerned. So the important thing here is you need to have, a typical BCG kind of portfolio, a bit, some stars, some cash cows, and there'll always be dogs. So you got to prepare for having this bunch of things. When put together, they deliver results. And that's how you preserve your autonomy. So for youngsters, I would ask, think about your careers as actually as a portfolio. And when you are developing in an environment like this, where you have a lot of autonomy, you need to really think hard and think way ahead, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, on what is it that you're going to develop. Keep your nose to the ground, keep your connections with your clients or the people who pay the firm the money, and then build these out, because that's what's really going to make you successful. So central thing I learned in my first few years is how to use autonomy better and how to then preserve it as I became more and more sort of senior in the system, by looking at my portfolio and ensuring I deliver performance. Now, the next, can you see my next slide?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir. Fine.
So the next key principle I want to talk about, which is a huge learning for me, is, and many people have said this before, you are like the United Nations, nothing can be done without 100 people agreeing to something. The answer is yes and no, right? Is yes, because in a partnership, we have a very strange situation where the owners are also the managers. So every shareholder is a person who runs a particular part of the business. So give you a few situations. So for example, if you want to fire a partner, he's also a shareholder. So how do you fire a shareholder from the system? And that shareholder assesses you as his leader when your time comes to determine whether you've performed or not. So it's a very interesting contrast. So first, and very, very importantly, getting that collective alignment of what the firm should be doing and driving becomes an important question. And I think Anand in the last talk talked about a goal, a clear direction or goal. That is in many ways far more important in a partnership environment, not so much from a communication point of view, but from an alignment point of view. Communication is easy because once the partners are agreed, then they've bought into it. It doesn't need to be communicated. It communicated the rest of the organization. But a very, very important point here is that different partners have different perceptions of goals. Some of them want a good life because the pay is not bad, right? Once you're running a portfolio, you don't want to be troubled about worrying about growth and worrying about working harder and so on. But the reality is, how do you retain talent? Talent can only be retained if they see they have a future by entering partnership. That means you have to grow. So growth is not an option. But getting the broader body of people, particularly those who think, well, I'm doing my part and don't trouble me, is an important choice. And that choice needs to be exercised judiciously if the partnership has to grow. In fact, I've had many conversations with some of my colleagues where they will come and say, you want us to do this and do that, but my pay is not going to increase. I'm going to be getting the same amount of money. So what's the point? I'd rather spend that extra hour with my family than worry about this. So it is a big question, right? And this is particularly important as the firm enters into adjacent and unrelated areas, which are necessary for growth. So clarity in goals is important. But going back, let me look at the higher purpose question. So in the early 2000, early part of this decade, I was part of our global group, which looked at staff engagement. And we had a huge challenge. And this was true in many companies. Many companies had an issue with staff engagement. And we were wondering what was happening. The large tech companies had begun to literally raid the ladder of every organization for talent. And they were pretty much telling these kids, you can change the world if you join our business. And that's exactly what they did, right? They did change the world. So one of our challenges was in a kind of dull and boring business like audit, how do you tell people you're changing the world? And so one of the important questions was, what is our higher purpose? And we went and searched through all of our history, and we found some very, very interesting snippets. For example, we actually worked on, signing off on all of the reparations after Nazi Germany's, fall. We worked on, for example, Nelson Mandela's election and, verifying and certifying the election. Now, those were the kind of, the stuff which John F. Kennedy talked about, landing on the moon, the janitor putting the man on the moon kind of purpose points. But we then did this across the firm globally, and not just the energy from the partners went up, but very importantly, the staff engagement shot up hugely. And this was actually chronicled in an HBR article in 2016, where the firm's efforts on doing this were talked about, and I personally benefited a lot, because I was at that time 20 years into the firm, and I was looking for my kind of next mojo, and this really fired me up to continue for several more years, because it was remarkable, and the kind of stories that I heard from younger colleagues on their personal purpose, because it's not just about the firm's purpose, it's what's my purpose, what am I doing? And there were some kids working for the Central Provident Fund in Singapore saying, my purpose is to safeguard the old Singaporean savings. And it was very, very interesting with the way they wrote their own purpose, right? And it's not just I'm just ticking or auditing some stuff. So that was a very key lesson I learned, and I think it's one that I know many companies have used it effectively. The third key point here I want to make is, as a young partner, when my leaders would come to me and ask, we're thinking of this, what do you think? Do you think it's a good idea? Should we do this? Shouldn't we do this? I would wonder, I mean, these guys are 15 years senior to me in the partnership. Why do they need my point of view? And that not just made me die for that decision, it also gave me a lot of pride. And so ever since I've used it with my colleagues, even if I don't have to consult them for something, is what do you think? Because it's a perspective, it's a point of view, and it enriches the quality of the decision. So, but it does take a little bit of swallowing your ego to go to somebody who's probably way more junior and maybe not as experienced as you, but has a very different worldview and may be able to contribute significantly. So this is a very important point. And so I think that's a big lesson I've learned over the years, and I've used it in every key decision I've had to take. And finally, the last one, in 2012, I got onto a global kind of government and infrastructure leadership group within the firm. This is one of our largest businesses around the world. And it's no surprise that now it's probably going to be the largest business after COVID, because government is taking over everything. But the point here was, I realized that I was asked to take on a regional role as the Asia Pacific head of this business. And somehow, obviously coming from Singapore is a small country, 300 million GDP now, 250, 200 at that time maybe, or 230, 240 billion. We had giants, Australia, China, Japan, in the region. And again, I learned this lesson from Ponds, dealing with very, very senior subordinates who, knew a lot more than you, who had more wisdom than you, who could probably, do your job with their eyes closed, but still they didn't want it. And you learned so much from them, and yet you help them in their lives. You help them with their jobs. So I did the same here when I got the job. I mean, I had these very, very different cultures. Australia, China, Japan, each one is like one pole in terms of the way they think. But how can you as a small country help? And again, the things which come to your rescue is your work. So interestingly, because Singapore is a gold standard for many things, it was a gold standard for broadband, right? We had actually helped the government with their broadband project, $2 billion across Singapore in 2008, 2009. Australia was just launching that. And I helped my colleagues sell that into that market. So I knew nuts about Australia, but I knew what to do with broadband, and I could help them win a large project. Same thing so this was using Singapore's strength to help facilitate our colleagues in the region to succeed. And another part was Singapore always has surplus pools of capital, and it was investing into other countries. So following your clients, we had a lot of good clients here who were entering and investing in other markets. So you go and help your colleagues in those countries win work with those clients. So ultimately, you help those guys win more work, succeed in their jobs, and then you win the respect, even though you're a small fry. And this was what I learned in kind of regional leadership. So I'm going to stop here with these thoughts. And maybe let me finish this slide, and then we can probably have a bunch of questions. But this is the flip side of consensus, which is conflict. So one of the big challenges I see in many environments is conflict is not surfaced enough. And it's not surfaced enough because hierarchy is used to stifle conflict. Now, unfortunately, as you know, we do have some hierarchy, but conflict is something which is there, and it's rampant, and it manifests itself in many ways in a partnership environment. So you cannot afford not to deal with it. In a corporate structure where the chairman says do this, most probably something will get done, or the guy will get fired, right? Here it's not easy to fire, as I told you. So if the guy is doing his job, he may not be doing other things, right? He may not be doing what you tell him to do. He may be doing what he thinks needs to be done, and he's earning his keep. So you can't do anything with that fella, right? So surfacing and resolving conflict is an interesting problem. And I've seen this again and again in many important processes. So let me talk about just 3 things in my career that I have seen. First is dissent is hidden. And when I use the word Asia, I have to pardon myself here because I'm talking to Asians in India mostly. But, in this part of the world, and some of my friends who've lived in Singapore and other parts of continental Asia will say, when you use the word Asia, they think Indians are not Asians, right? They're talking about the Chinese, for the most part, who think very differently and work very differently. Conflict, dissent is very, very difficult to discern in those environments because respect always overlays dissent. So you will not know it, but people will not do what you're telling them to do. They will give you face, as they say, meaning in your face they will say, yes, or they will just nod their head without saying yes. But it basically means you'll get nothing done. So you have to surface it actively, and you have to find out what's the issue, and you have to deal with it. Otherwise, you will not move forward. So that's an important thing I've discovered over the years. The second part, and I think this is hugely crucial, and again, it's one of the challenges partnerships face, is when you're trying to bring somebody into the partnership, there's a lot of questions. Firstly, does this guy or this girl have the values of the partnership? Will they bet the farm and destroy the business? And we've seen this, right? I mean, Somebody in Houston many years ago, went and did something, and the firm is put in difficulty. So individual partners have the ability to bind the partnership to decisions, which then the vast majority have to suffer. So does this person have the values? Do they have the right ethical fiber, and so on? So this becomes a hugely important issue. And so the admission process requires enormous consultation, requires a lot of debate. And I think it's fair to say we've probably got a very, very good feel of what can work and what will not work. And at the end of the day, it's about actually taking on board all the concerns and dealing with them in a thoughtful and deliberate way. And finally, leadership contest. This is a tricky one. Now, in corporates, and I've seen this again and again, leadership is a zero-sum game. There are 2 guys or 3 persons contending for a job. One person gets it. The other 2 are kicked out, or they resign in disgust, go and join a competitor or do something else. Now, the point to note is, in a partnership environment, this is not good. Why? Because the aspirant to leadership is actually a very capable and highly value-adding individual who needs to be in the firm and to nurture it and grow it along with the others. So a very elderly Chinese gentleman who I worked with in our firm told me, when you become a leader, you can't sit on top of everybody. You got to work with your enemies. So it's a very, very interesting point that you have to work with your enemies. You have to embrace them as your brothers and work with them. And I think this is important. And I think it's a lesson for corporates to learn most of the time. How do you keep your best people right at the top and not sort of sacrifice them because of somebody's ego? Now, the way to do it, we found various leadership situations. So I will stop there, and maybe Mr. Balraman, I think Mr. Ravi Shankar and a few others, I want to say a word about Mr. Ravi Shankar. He was my mentor in Ponds, an outstanding individual, a brilliant strategist in finance, and I'm most privileged to have him sort of question and share his thoughts on this. As also we have Mr. N.K. Prasad, who's on the screen, Pankaj Seth, and Narsimhan, my dear friend from Singapore. So, gentlemen, your thoughts and your questions. It'll be good to have that conversation first, I suppose.
Thank you, Mr. Ravi Shankar, for your questions, sir. Mr.
Mr.
Balraman, would like to add anything?
Mr. Balraman would like to start.
Well, Ravi, I would suggest you set the ball rolling. I do have some questions of him, but I will make that observation. You see, Satya, in every organization, there is a formal structure and there is an informal structure. Sociology says that the informal group norms apply, and a person is admitted into the informal group, and he becomes a genuine part of the group only when the informal group admission takes place. So there would be unstated group norms in your company too. What are they? You may admit somebody as a partner, but he will not really become a genuine partner for 3 to 6 months to 9 months later until he understands what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, how to behave. This takes some learning.
So that's a good point. We actually have in our, at least, and this varies across countries, so I can't speak for every country in our every member firm, as we say, but we have like a 2-year period during which this process of, shall we say, understanding and feeling the relevant individual happens, during which time they are allowed to a culture to the group and be part of the group, understand the group norms, before which they are more formally brought into the the real group. So there's a 2-stage kind of process. So we allow 2 years for that.
Oh, okay. So it does take that kind of a time.
So we actually formalized it because we realized that this is an important question that needs to be dealt with.
So getting into KPMG does not mean you are in. It takes another 2 years. Okay, that allows for good observation. Ravi?
Yeah, so let me just give you some background to my comments. I used to work with Unilever Group, starting with Ponds and then ending up with Unilever UK and then in Hindustan Lever Bombay for about 20 years. And then I was lateral partner entry into Ernst & Young. There I stayed for about 10 to 12 years. So therefore, and now after my retirement from Ernst & Young, I'm back to the industry now in the form of directors on some of the boards, reputed companies. So my experience will be both from client perspective as well as from the consulting perspective. So you may have to pardon me if I mix the two. Okay. Now, let me go back to the first issue of leadership and partner choice, partner selection. One example of key differentiation between a leadership contest in a manufacturing industry like Hindustan Lever or Ponds versus a leadership contest in a firm like Ernst & Young or KPMG. The difference is, as Satya was mentioning, you are mentioning rightly, that the partners have a stake in the business in a consulting organization. They put their personal savings there and their undrawn net capital is lying invested in the business. So when they elect a person as a partner, they're going to share that with another person, number one. Number two, when they elect the global or the country managing partner, they generally look for one key attribute, whether this person is going to contribute to value accretion for my capital. So that is a main criteria which is taken into account. Of course, the second major important factor is how is his reputation in the market? Because it is again going back to one of the key issues in a international service firm is brand versus person. Now you can be a partner in a firm like Ernst & Young or KPMG, but are you going to be subservient to the brand, or are you going to be, or the brand is going to be value added by your presence? So this is a very, very tricky question. When I joined Ernst & Young in 1997, the local market in India, we had just only 20 partners. I was the 20th partner admitted. And today we have about 500 to 600 partners. Okay. At that time, S.R. Battleboy was the audit firm, which got into an alliance, strategic alliance with Ernst & Young to leverage its global network. Now, at that time, people were not even able to pronounce the name Ernst & Young properly in India. So the key question there is brand versus the person. At that point in time, when we were evolving in India, person became more important than the brand. So the reputation of the individual and his relationships are much more important than the brand, because he is indirectly building the brand in the country. Unlike where some other countries like Singapore, where it is probably all, but when Satya joined probably 25 years ago, the situation would have been similar. So the brand reputation is a very key important factor for the partner. So whether he will kill the brand like what he was mentioning as the Enron situation, or whether he would add value to the brand. So this is very, very critical. So these are some observations I just preliminary thoughts I had on this. A few other topics are there, I will join us as we go along.
Yeah. Does Kotesh or Narasimhan, do they have any points of view?
Yes, Mr. Prasad is there. Mr. Pankaj is also joined us. Mr. Narasimhan. So go ahead. Mr. Prasad, you would like to go ahead, sir? Yeah, you unmute yourself, sir, please. Thank you.
So Satya, it's a very interesting perspective, and when I visualize an organization with hundreds of partners who are running entrepreneurial type of businesses, and you yourself are competing in the marketplace. So how do you evolve a cogent and a cohesive competitive strategy? And for example, how do you prioritize and make your investments for innovation and growth? And how do you build consensus about it?
So, good question, Prasad. Let me share a bit about how we approach it. There is obviously there are business units in every firm and every partnership environment, and the business units operate as units of contiguous strategy. So you would have, say, an audit in a firm like us. You would have an audit, tax, a risk advisory, or a what we call consulting business, and a deals business. Right? Typically, these are the four kind of pockets of business that are run. Each of these have a coherent internal strategy, which is aligned in the market, and it's also aligned regionally and globally. Now, having said that, the regional and global alignment varies by organization, because some of the organizations,
unmute பண்ணுப்பா ஒரு question கேட்கணும்.
some firms have what you call more globalized structures, where there is greater global alignment on investment. So some may say, I will build a global telecom. So that means that all of the investments there will be very globally aligned. Another may say, look, I don't have a bunch of clients who are very global, so we will have a decentralized local strategy. But within the market, this group of partners will act as a collective, working together to conquer. And that's deal with the question that you asked. So that's how strategy is made, right? By contiguous business unit, regionally.
Yeah. So sorry. Will you allow Satya to speak, please?
Yes, please.
I think some mess up in your muting and unmuting. Let Satya speak.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay. So
yeah, go ahead, sir.
So Prasad, that's how it works, right? As a strategy. Having said that, I must say that over the years, this has got better. It used to be extremely laissez-faire, say 20 years ago, or even 25 years ago. But increasingly, more and more of the firms have begun to have greater global alignment. And I'll tell you, this is in one particular business where it's very, very strong, and that's in the management consulting business. And why is that the case? It's because increasingly you are having to build more global business models. So, for example, we all know that the large consulting firms are now using global delivery networks to actually deliver large-scale technology projects. So, if you're doing a huge project for, let's say, the federal government, in the US, it is possible that some of the work is done. I'm probably using a bad example. Let's say take a case of a JP Morgan or a large company like that. You would have a large pool of people sitting in India doing a lot of the technology work associated with that large project, because there's a huge cost arbitrage benefit, and which is why you see large offices in Hyderabad or Bangalore or Gurgaon or places like that. So that business, the business model is more globally aligned. And I think that is the question I think we all ask is, what is our evolving business model in each of the businesses, and how we plan to deliver on that business model?
Okay, now you can bring in Narasimhan.
Mr. Narasimhan Narayan.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Hi, Satya. Thanks for a good chat so far, Satya, and very enlightening. Just two questions to you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah.
Clear, sir.
So Satya, two questions to you. You made an observation earlier that the partners are both shareholders and managers, right? Now, as a shareholder, the objective is maximizing shareholder value, obviously. As a manager, you have to maximize the value for your clients. Now, how do you manage this conflict in a partnership environment is something I want to understand. The second question is, there is a huge, I would say, a fight for talent going forward among millennials. And as an organization, for example, for us to say that we are changing the world, by improving eyesight or giving eyesight access to better eyesight to people, we have a story to say. So the millennials start looking at how do you make a change to environment, how do you make a change to society, and so on. In a professional services firm, how do you manage the story? And do you think that's going to be a challenge going forward in attracting talent?
Yeah, very, very good questions, Narasimhan. So let me answer the second question first, because I think it's something I had alluded to in my discussion on the purpose question. It is very interesting that when we initially started discovering purpose at a personal level for many of the staff, there was an element of, well, this doesn't seem very deep, right? Are we really doing this stuff? And as we went into it, so let me give you an example. A lot of the work that we're actually doing, in fact, makes an impact. So for example, I talked to you about broadband, and believe it or not, our team worked for 3 years on that broadband work in Singapore. And if you looked at it and said, did that change the world for Singapore, and how has it helped during COVID? That's a huge, so you're changing the face of the nation when it comes to projects like that. Now, that's in the consulting side. Now, in the audit side, it is very interesting. I mean, all you have to look to is what's happened on Wirecard, right? And many other such situations. There is a huge role for even the person looking at the bank statements, right? To protect the savings of an elderly pensioner in, say, Germany or France, right? And if that person says this is a mundane job, and doesn't realize that what they're doing is of such huge importance because it feeds into the financial statements and the reliability of the financial statements, they will look at that very, very differently. So there is a huge connection to purpose in most jobs. It is about really discovering it that I think we have to spend more time. Because if indeed, Narasimhan, as you said, a job was not really there with a purpose, I think you will have to automate it or do something about it. And I think that's the discussion that's happening a lot now on what jobs are really needed to be done by humans and what jobs can be, replaced. So on your first question, sorry, can you remind me what it was? I just lost track.
Conflict between giving value to customer and to the company.
So managers and shareholders, actually, this is a very interesting point. We as partners have to both nurture the client and ensure that the business is viable, right? And so it's almost like saying, if you try and squeeze a client too much for fees in a particular year, because you as a partner have to worry about your business for the next several years, you personally are going to lose. It is not like a corporate where you go and hammer the business, get the sales out, and next year you're posted to another job. You are going to be there facing the same client, having to answer to the same issues, right? So there is I would call not a conflict, but a sense of check and balance internally in the partner's conscience, which says, look, I can't squeeze this because it's my future. It's not just my present. It's not somebody else's future. It's my future.
Can I add
Yeah.
to that? Actually, it is two sides of the same coin, Narasimhan. Unless you add value to the client, you cannot grow in a market like India. How is the client deciding in favor of you? Unless the partner has the ability to bring the right skill sets for delivery and at a reasonable value, he is not going to get selected. And if he is going to get selected, then only the firm grows. So it is basically both sides of the same coin. So it is inherent, as Satya was saying. See, our head is on the market. It will get chopped if you don't perform. That is why it is people more important than the brand, or brand more important than the people, is a very, very difficult question. But I think here these two play a critical role in ensuring that the shareholder value is created only by proper delivery.
Very well said, Shankar. Actually, the brand lives for the consumer and the customer. So by delivering to the consumer, by making the consumer and customer happy, the brand gains in the process of satisfying the consumer. That's a very well, that's a general principle. I hope that is a principle in KPMG.
Yeah.
Yep,
So
There is one more addition, that here the product is actually the person. It is not different, unlike manufacturing industry where we have a dream flower talc or something, here it is two in one. The person is with a skill set is a product. So that's a huge difference. Therefore, he has to deliver value.
Well done. Well done.
So Pankaj, if you're ready with your questions.
Yeah. Hi, Satya. Thanks for a very interesting presentation, very different from our normal day-to-day. I think we are caught up in very good learning experience. I have two questions, one around the consensus part and one around the conflict. On consensus, the question is that what is the role of hard data, scenarios, numbers, etc., versus softer factors like listening, negotiating, converging? So that's on consensus. And conflict, simple question, where do you step in proactively and where do you let it pass? How do you decide?
yeah, so the importance of hard data is that what we found is that increasingly more and more we are data driven in driving decisions, and that's where I talked about how do you get decisions made. There is a lot more rigor in looking at data because you have more and more younger partners in the mix who are come from a different educational context and background, who are not as convinced or who don't probably have the same kind of shall we say rules of thumb as say some of the older partners may have. So you're dealing with a broad mix of partners, and you have to have a far more rigorous structure to communicate with all of these people in order to get your point across. So increasingly, you're right, there's more and more hard data which is used, whether it is business case, market presence. We even for example, third party feedback from clients, actually interviewing them and saying, is this guy somebody you would work with? And so on and so forth. So a lot more data is going into some of these decisions, as opposed to somebody writing in a paper that they've done all these great things. So that's definitely something which we are doing a lot more of. Yeah. And what was your second question?
On conflict, where do you let it go and where do you decide to step in proactively?
So I think when there are important decisions, I think we can't afford to kind of let conflict go, because what I have seen is in decisions where the firm will lose by not having resolved the conflict, we will have to get to the end, even if it is painful and even if it means a lot more work. So the decision we make ultimately is the firm going to be better off by letting this pass? And it's no longer about the individual or the individuals involved, right? So I think that's a very important point of decision making. So one thing I want to highlight to the earlier question and what Mr. Ravi Shankar said, I think this thing about person or the professional and the brand it keeps going in a flux. I think there is no one answer at all points of time. So for a very long time, the brand was bigger than the individual in the more mature markets, right? And I think what Mr. Ravi Shankar said in India, maybe because at that time the market was not mature, the individual was bigger than the brand, and so the individual then carried the brand. But in a mature market, the brand is bigger than the individual. But I want to highlight one point. When you get into unrelated areas, right? Let's say you're getting into sort of data analytics or deep kind of AI and so on, there the brand may not be able to carry the individual. The individual has to carry the brand, because here you're relying on the power and the knowledge and the insights of the individual to build that business. Over a period of time, then the brand kind of takes on that quality through that extension and becomes stronger. So I think we need to recognize both the market context and the product market context, because you must remember that the product markets are not all homogeneous. There are multiple product markets in which these firms are operating.
Satya, I have a question. Can I go ahead, Mr. Balraman?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So I would imagine that a number of your partners will be specialists and maybe possibly even super specialists, if I can use that word. So how do you ensure that, and I guess that, in your kind of company, somebody becomes a partner in maybe 10, 15, 20 years max. And so how do you assure that, there is no fatigue for the individual, and how do you assure that, there are enough challenges and career growth opportunities for the partner?
Yeah, very, very good question. So this is about people, and I've got one slide later on people, but let me answer that question because it's an important one. So one thing we discovered quite early on is that a partner needs a support system. And that support system is the pyramid that supports him as a professional. That pyramid is not the same in every business. It's in some businesses like corporate finance, it's a very, very narrow or a less leveraged pyramid. In a business like audit, it's a much more highly leveraged pyramid. And in a new business areas, it depends on the business model of that area that will determine how many people will be there within that team. The partner often decides that. First point. The second point, as this business grows, if I'm a partner, I have to do X million dollars. It varies by country, so I don't want to say what the number is. It's X million dollars per partner in an area, so that delivers the returns. As this business grows, the most important challenge for the partner is who is the next partner I'm going to bring on board. Now, Mr. Ravi Shankar talked about what he did in India with Ernst & Young in growing the corporate finance or the deal advisory or advisory business. You must realize that the only way you can grow is by bringing others into the partnership. It makes your job harder because you have to then go and look for more work for yourself. But those guys who are working with you are all aspiring to become partners. So the way you do this is by, nurturing your lieutenants to also come into the partnership. And when they come in, and then you kind of build that out, you start expanding that pool. So that's how you de-stress yourself. I've seen businesses where partners have done tens of millions of dollars all alone, and they burn out after 10 years because they've not built 2 or 3 other partners who can take over that load. And mistakenly, many of them think they will take all of the returns from that revenue. But the answer is it may not be the case either, because it's a partnership, right? So I think the important thing to keep in mind is sustainability. And like you rightly said, you can only build a sustainable kind of model where you think of succession well ahead of time. So 3 years from before you would bring in a partner, you must have identified this person is possibly ready. Then you have to actually socialize that person with the other partners so that the other partners feel that, okay, this guy is a good guy. He's not going to bet the farm. He's not going to ruin our business, right? And nurture that person to come into the firm.
Yeah, Satya, you made a point about whether a partner adds value to a business or a business adds value to the partner. See, I had seen situations in service organizations, say, even take MMA, for example. If a person is joining MMA, is he adding value to MMA or is he trying to take value out of MMA? If it is the second case, we need to be very careful because we don't want people to become, suck the energy out of MMA. We do not want them to become known because of MMA. If they are going to add value to MMA, we want them to join us. And we also realize the importance of looking at succession for, several years after us. This lesson came home to us very early in the mid 90s. And ever since, as you can see, MMA is doing very well because MMA takes care of these aspects.
Okay. So shall I?
You want to go on? Yeah.
Yes, we are. In fact, just to add, Mr. Balraman brought the change in MMA, the succession plan and thing. I think you have been very not doing that. It has happened during his tenure as a presidentship. So you would like to go back to your presentation now, sir?
Sure. Okay. Let me continue with the next. Okay. So moving on. So we spoke about people. I just want to make one important point on this. And that is, everybody loves this idea of recruiting stars. I want to get the best people. And I want to make a counterpoint on this. You cannot get the best people if you don't know what is best for your firm. And very often, the best people in another firm may not necessarily be the best people in your firm. So let me share with you one of the examples. So when we set up our strategy business, this was in this part of this 2015, 2016. Of course, the conventional wisdom is you have to get these people from the top strategy firms. And we went there and we evaluated and we did get some people from those firms. And what we discovered is those firms are organized very differently. So you cannot separate the individual, what we call the individual's portable talent from the firm talent or the firm skills, which are specific to that firm. So when the person comes to your organization, they can't even bring their clients because the clients are wedded to that firm, not to them. So the portable talent becomes much less value for the amount you're paying them. So the idea then we discovered, and I didn't have the theoretical basis of this. Something was not right. And then I discovered this work by this Harvard professor called Boris Groysberg, who had run this thing called Chasing Stars. He had looked at Wall Street, investment analysts or equity analysts who are probably the most portable talent in any industry, and found that even they were very, very linked to the firms they were in. So when you move them from one firm to another, the talent didn't work. So there is no point chasing a star if you're not sure that he will bring all of that talent to you. It's much better to get a person who is probably working in a firm in a lower tier than you, right? Bring him to your environment. You have lots of connections, you have lots of clients, and this guy flowers. So you're able to make the most of that talent. So that's a very important lesson I've learned over the years. And it's an important one for many of us to take back, because it's very easy to say we need to get the best people. And the best people cost a lot. And then after that, your business doesn't work if you don't know why you're hiring them. The next point I want to make, and so this is also related to the fact that a partnership is ultimately a peerage, right? You can't have prima donnas who think that the firm is dependent on them for what they do. And this is why many prima donnas end up becoming individual players running their own firms. They are unable to fit into that environment. Right? So that's another important point that needs to be kept in mind. I mean, we hired 44,000 people in 2019. That's a large number of people. So, making sure the recruitment processes are managed with a lot of rigor is critical, both from a testing on values and looking at the psychology of the individual, and skills. Now, one important point I want to highlight is that if you look at hiring, one of the lessons I've learned in my years interviewing is that you have to treat, when you recruit so many people, you'll be probably seeing a multiple of this. And there'll be more unhappy people than happy people when you interview them. And let's be fair, in this environment, you're not just interviewing entry-level people, you're interviewing senior people as well. And one lesson I learned very painfully was, being in an interview, not as the primary interviewer, but I was called in because it was an area I understood. And obviously, my fellow interviewer wasn't really very, shall we say, kind to the interviewee. And the interviewee ended up as the CFO of one of my very important clients. And I had to suffer for 3 years dealing with this client. So one big lesson to learn in this is, what goes around comes around. And so you really have to treat people with respect. And that's a big lesson I learned in Ponds. Treat everybody with dignity and respect, because you never know when this person might be really important and may be deciding your future, right? So that's something I've learned the hard way. And so I really am very gentle and actually give a lot of respect in the interviews I do. But of course, we do test and we push people in what we need to get from them. Training for quality is a very important
Do you
thing.
have slides?
Sorry?
Do you have slides?
Oh, sorry, you can't see my slide?
No, we can't see your slides.
Oh, okay. I don't know why it's... Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Can you see it now?
No.
Okay. So this is...
Not an it's you go to the slide share. Yes, okay.
Okay, you can see that. Huh? So not chasing stars, then hiring, training for quality.
Yeah. Group captain, I can't see the slides. Can you?
Hey, you're not put the slide share. You have to put on your screen, sir. Go to the slide share. Shows.
Can you see now?
Yes, now it's come. Yes, sir.
Okay,
yes.
Right. So basically, not really chasing stars. I've covered that. I've talked about hiring. I've talked about training for quality. So training for quality is key, because particularly in some of our businesses, this is becoming a huge consistency is very important. And I think there's a lot of thing happening there. And many of you will know, in audit, many of us have grown up as being the so-called on the job, right? There's an apprenticeship kind of environment which determines how you train people. So a lot of time is spent on that. And that continues to this day. I just have to say values is critical, and we test that particularly in people entering the partnership. So there's a lot of psychometric work that happens to determine that they are of the right moral and ethical fiber. And finally, I think increasingly what we're seeing is we have to recruit people better than us. And gone are the days when you hired somebody who was not a threat to you. You can't think like that anymore, because there is really a war for talent. So you really need to hire people who are better than you if you want to build a legacy. And more, that's what many partnerships are thinking about. Lastly, a word on compensation and rewards. So I'm just going to drink some water. So I think there are some important decisions, and it will be relevant in any partnership environment. So is it performance versus seniority? Many partnerships which have used pure seniority in paying out lose the younger, more hungry, and more delivering partners. So you have to have a mix between performance and seniority, and not put everything into seniority. The second thing is credit versus cash. And I think this is an important point. Many partners don't realize, particularly when they are younger, that they need to build a bank of credit with their fellow partners in order to draw from that later on in life. when you need help or when you need, So sometimes in firms, and I have to say this, there's, Kotesh asked this before, there will be some internal competition. And there'll be some gray areas where, you should be taking the business instead of the other guy, and the other guy went and took the business, right? So I think here building that mutual respect and giving credit, letting your other partner take that business sometimes may be the right thing to do, because you may be set up for leadership because of your actions, right? And then finally, eat what you kill versus pooling. Now, this in an investment banking kind of environment, of course, there's a lot more eat what you kill kind of thinking. But you must understand, again, businesses go up and down, and you have to have a certain mix of pooling versus, purely linking it to the business performance. So these are conundrums that partnerships face. There's no straightforward answers. But as a partner, you have to think through these in order to be able to give clarity to the partner group, because this is an area which is often tricky and often needs a good and a thoughtful, dealing. Yeah. Okay, this is a favorite for me, because I think over the years I've learned, and I think this was Anand who said this. He said, everybody has a victim mindset, right? Fortunately, in a partnership environment, if you're a victim, you have to pack your bags and go. It's time to leave. So you can't afford to have a victim mindset. So what kind of mindset should you have? You really have to have a mindset of benchmarking to improve, not to explain. And Taleb is one of my favorites. So he says, suckers try to win arguments, non-suckers try to win. So it's simple. You just have to try and win. Not try to explain why you didn't win. Because you didn't win. Get on with the next thing, right? Because you, on average, will lose as much as you win. If not more, lose more than win. Because if you have a market with 3 or 4 players, you can't win everything. You can't even win 1 in every 2. If you can win in 1 in 3, you're not bad, right? So just have to get on with it. So I think you have a pressure to perform. So why? Because it hurts. It hurts your P&L. It hurts your business directly. So just get on with it. When I was building the M&A business in 2006, 2007, one of the large law firms, I had lunch with the senior partner there, and he told me, look, Satya, I like you. You're a good guy. And I was just about building the business. And he said, you know what? Your competitor across the road, they just go and meet every company and they have a bloody good M&A business. And I couldn't sleep for the next month, because I said, obviously we have a problem. And it took me like 2 or 3 years after that to find the right person to build that business. And I'm glad I felt that way, because if you don't feel that way, you're not going to act on it. And so use market feedback to get better. When we hire new people from other firms or other types of business, we really have to learn from them, because as the firm expands and grows in new areas, you don't have all the answers. They have more to offer than you think, right? Whether it's in the way you should pay some of the people in those businesses or not, right? So it's important to learn. So we're just building out our digital, extensively building out these areas like AI, experience, user experience, and all of that. And it's really new businesses which require different, minded people. And you need to pay them different, because we are competing with startups there, right? And all of the big tech players. So learning from them. For me personally, the biggest learning was learning from other cultures when I did these regional jobs. And I'll just share a few thoughts there. The Japanese will never say anything in a meeting unless you ask them for their opinion. So it is hugely important in a meeting with, say, Australians, people from India, people from Singapore, that these 3 people will speak, but the Japanese will not speak. And you'll think he has nothing to say. But he's got a lot to say, but you have to ask him. Because the Japanese-minded people, and I learned this again the hard way, they come to a meeting And the mindset of the Australian is, well, when I come to a meeting, I better prove why I need to be in the meeting. So I have to make some clever remarks, right? The Japanese, when he comes to the meeting, he says, I come to the meeting because I deserve to be in the meeting. I don't need to explain myself and prove myself. So very different mindset. So it's important to draw them out and get their insight and input if you want to make a good decision. Now, when I moved to Singapore and for a number of years, I always felt that particularly those who didn't speak English were stupid. And that's a function of the way we often are sort of groomed, because we always deal with people who are highly articulate, highly communicative, can explain their points of view with great vigor and vitality. But many people of Chinese origin, some of them are Chinese educated, but they're brilliant, they're incredibly good, but they just cannot speak or articulate themselves. So you can't say that because they can't speak or they are not articulate, they don't know. And now, of course, we can see where China is. I mean, 20 years ago, you wouldn't have said the same thing about China, right? So it's just the point that we have to get out of our mental frames and think very differently when we're dealing with these other cultures. And then the thing I learned from the Australians is structure and process and driving, very strong rigor in cadence and things like that. Very, very good in things like that. And the Indonesian was very interesting because we built that business in the last 4 or 5 years. And we had a person from Singapore running it for a long time. And we found that we were unable to get the Indonesians to work. Why? Because we were recruiting people who looked like us and who worked like us in Singapore. But those were not the people who would succeed in Indonesia. So you actually needed a different lens and a different filter to hire these people if they had to succeed. More importantly, how do you keep these people? We also found a strong link between a local conversation, somebody who this person trusts, as being able to have that discussion and keep the person should he want to move. Finally, I found the best way in all of the businesses I've overseen. Unfortunately, unlike consumer products, we don't have Nielsen. So we can't monitor market share. So the only thing I can monitor is in a month, in a quarter, in a year, how many people have we lost? How many of these have actually gone to competition? Which competition? And that's the best way to monitor your market share of talent. And it's easy to figure out because none of our firms publish numbers, right? But if I know over a 3-year period how this talent has moved to different firms, you can get your market share and figure out what's going wrong or what's going right. And this is an easy way to deal with many businesses in the firm. Moving on, I know I'm running out of time, but this is hugely important. In my view, I think, and this is true for every professional, regardless of whether you're in a partnership environment, build your trust balance sheet. Don't worry about your financial balance sheet. And somebody once told me that you must always have a balance of favors where people owe you as opposed to you owe others. And that works hugely to your advantage when you need it. Because if you keep constantly building the balances of favors that you do to other people, you are likely to be in a really good position when you need support and help. So I used to have lunches in my early days with clients, and I found that very often I went away and I didn't have anything to do after that. The clients never even returned my calls after that. And then I discovered that unless, and this was very early on, this was like 25 years ago, unless you actually, in every meeting or every conversation, you have something which gives that person a reason to go back and do his job better, why should he give you his time again? So all this kind of chit-chatting over lunch and having an informal conversation is all good, but there has to be at least a few key things where you're going to make a difference. Across geographies, I think you have to leave money on the table for others. So when you work across offices, and this is very special in our business, Very often you try to take more money of the other firm. I don't think it's a great idea. Same thing with service areas. Now, assets and liabilities can hinder trust building. I think there's an issue here because I find that we end up with, and this is unique to partnerships. I said they are like families. The biggest problems happens with families when you're trying to divide assets, right? Otherwise, everything is okay with the family. When it comes to dividing assets, everybody starts fighting. So a principle I've followed and a number of my colleagues have followed, let's not have assets in the partnership. All assets, just no, and no liabilities either. So there are no intergenerational problems within the business. So you don't get into a situation where you have to test the trust between the partners. And finally, consultation is hugely important. And that's how you build vulnerability-based trust. Okay, I think this is my last point. I think we need to give professionals social status. So, and I think here, and this is very relevant for younger people, you start building your equity early, and only then you have a line of sight. We think staff functions are in flux now, support functions, but they will come up and there'll be more status for that. I think we're stretching the partner title, which may not be a great idea in many firms. You have things like associate partner and so on and so forth, but everybody really wants the partner title. So I think it's something which will have to be dealt with. Personally, I found you have to stay grounded. Always serve a client, even if you're doing leadership roles. Only then you can build empathy with your colleagues. And finally, I think one of the big things I've realized in the old days, somebody said you became senior, you could sit in the office and read the papers. Sorry, that's no longer possible. You just work harder and harder every time you go up. And I think it was Mr. Balraman who said in one of our chats, somebody who became a chairman of a large company said the regret he had was getting the title, but not discovering it actually meant more work. And we often end up getting a title and we think we've arrived, but the journey has only just begun, because you just have to do work much, much harder to justify to yourself, to your fellow partners. So I will stop there and I'll leave you with my key takeaways. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You can key takeaways. People are read. You can close the share screen because the number of questions that come from the YouTube viewers as well as you are watching this. And Mr. Balram, with your permission, can I take the questions from the people who ask from the public? YouTube.
Yeah, go to the public. I think Pons has dominated this too much. Yeah, enough questions from Pons. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Sir, there's a question from one of your YouTube viewers. Would you like to close the screen so that I can?
Sure.
Is it okay otherwise?
Yeah, I'll close it. Just give me a minute. I just
meanwhile, gentlemen, there also because Mr. Satya has clearly said he's very keen in feedback and he brought out in presentation. There's a feedback poll which will come. Just take about 30 seconds just to answer your feedback. Meanwhile, I'll go to the next question which has come from the one of the YouTube viewer. They said, sir, information is power in a partnership. Most of the partners keep the information to themselves many a time, and this is where the trust deficit happens. How do you build trust among the partners? Once the trust deficit happens, it's very, very difficult to retrieve it. How do you build the trust over a period? What practice you?
Yeah, I think there are two things there. I think one is try as much as possible not to get into a trust deficit. That's the best and simplest rule. But the second rule is, when you've got into that situation, work with somebody the other person trusts to bring you back. I don't think you can try and solve this on your own. There will be somebody within the firm that person trusts. Work with that person to get you back to at least a neutral situation. Because I think most of us try to solve our problems by ourselves. And that's the problem in a partnership. You have a lot of help at hand, but you need to have the, shall we say, subsume your ego a little bit to go and ask for help, because you can fix it with help. And I've seen this happen again and again.
Thank you, sir. There's a question from Kannan. He says, you talked about portfolio of business, which we totally agree with you. Is there a portfolio approach for partners as well? How valued is diversity in partnerships?
Actually, I have to say we are a bit lucky in Singapore in this regard. It may not be the case across other countries. So, because of the focus and dominance on engineering among male graduates, more than 60 to 65% of our intake of entry level is female. So we have a majority of female graduates. And then as these people go up the system, of course, there is attrition. But I'm really proud that even at the partner level, after all this, we have at least a quarter of partners who are female. So there's a very high level of diversity, at least from a male-female point of view. When it comes to nationality, I'm very happy that over the years, we have had quite a large pool of partners across many geographies as well in a country like Singapore. So that's on both grounds, we are finding great value in it. I must say with some honesty that this diversity brings with it a challenge of understanding and communication. So, somebody like an Australian will be very direct in the way they feel about a problem or an issue. And very often that's viewed not so nicely by some of our Chinese colleagues, because why? In our part of the world, you can't separate the issue from the person. Australians are very straight in that I will shout at you today, but tomorrow I'll go and have a beer with you, right? Because I'm dealing with an issue now, but personally I have nothing against you. So this part of it needs more cross-cultural understanding. Time is a big issue. Punctuality is a big issue. Some of the people, particularly of German origin in my partnership, they're incredibly concerned about punctuality. Some others may not be, because we view time a bit more cyclically, right? So again, fortunately, COVID has made things so easy, because you can't be late for a meeting, because you just sit there and click and you get into the meeting really fast. So it's improved punctuality quite a lot now.
Thank you, sir. I think we have more than 1,800 viewers watching this program. The number of questions that come, we'll try and squeeze in as many questions as possible. Next 10 minutes, Mr. Balraman has agreed for extension of 5-10 minutes. Is it okay, Mr. Balraman?
I think it's already 7:35, so yes, maybe 2 or 3 more questions. Yeah.
Lovely, sir. So there's a question come from Mr. Venkateshwaran. He says, sir, what you share is the excellent concept. At times it happens that the individual acquire brand image bigger than the firm's brand image. So how will the firm handle such a situations?
Yeah, so I mean that's a really difficult one, because we've had some situations like that, and the only way you deal with it is make sure that the individual gets a leadership role within the firm, because if the individual is unable to do that, then you are heading into a serious conflict. If indeed the individual's brand is so big, it must be delivering value for the firm. And so you must be able to find what I call a compromise between his brand and his value to the firm, and then find a role which makes best use of that brand.
Yeah, Satya, this thing will always happen, but as long as there is no incoherence between the individual's image and KPMG's image, there is really no conflict. He only adds value to KPMG.
That's right.
Good.
Yeah, all that we were saying was that someone who has no brand image whatsoever is trying to gain societal brand image by becoming something in KPMG. That is something that will detract from your value.
That's right. Yeah.
Last but one question, sir. It's from Mr. Srinivasan. He wants to know, in collaborative work, how do you sense emergence of a fault lines?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
He says, in a collaborative work, how do you sense the emergence of a fault line? Something is going to be cautioning you that something fault is going to happen. Fault line is happening. How do you judge and how do you sense that fault lines?
Yeah, I think there are 2 ways I've seen. One is obviously you're seeing gossip, which is happening, which I think Mr. Balraman talked earlier about the informal kind of networks. I always find that when there's a problem, before it reaches the meetings, it's in the corridors, it's in the toilets, it's in the coffee shops between the partners. So keeping your ears to the ground is very important to know when fault lines are potentially emerging, because this is an important thing where you need to know and you need to nip this in the bud. Another thing is, which is related, is deadline slip, and we always find that in collaborative projects, and we often wonder that people are giving excuses on why something is done or not done. Again, we have no time to waste, because we don't have a product which runs and which delivers money, right? It's our time. And if we're sitting in meetings and actually discussing something, if there is no tangible value from it, or if somebody is explaining why they are doing something but not achieving something, we just have to move on. So delays in deadlines on specific projects is the other way we pick this up, and we just have to can the collaboration and move on to the next thing.
Thank you, sir. One last question, and meanwhile, I also request all the viewers watching YouTube, Facebook, we already got a feedback form. Please do fill in your feedback, because your feedback is very important. After the last question address, I'll also request the viewers who are watching the program Zoom, please quickly, just 30 seconds, just fill in your feedback form, but it will bring us, it will make us really relook, and we can bring you some outstanding programs, and also great feedback to the speaker. One last question, Mr. Satya, is you spoke about Singapore Provident Fund, and where the aim is to safeguard the interest of young and old people. In your presentation, you mentioned, is it to do with the culture of the Singapore government and Singapore people, or is it the partnership built confident over a period? Is it the culture has got to do with this, or it can be built in any part of the world, similar faith between the government and the people whom they are serving? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think it can actually be done. Ultimately, I think it can be done by primarily if you start working on the quality of government. So it's very interesting. Just earlier this week, I was speaking at a forum on the anti-corruption, and one of the very, very important questions that is asked is how do you build an efficient government and a political environment? And so one of the important points there was really if you have a good political system and you have a strong government, I think you build trust in the people. And I think these people then become a very, very important, the way of improving and building things like Provident Fund or other, innovations to support the people. So I think it's about governance or government and the political establishment.
Thank you so much, sir. I think yes, trust is very, very important at every element. Mr. Balraman, your concluding remarks before we close the thing. It's over to Mr. Balraman.
Yeah, thank you, Satya. I think a most interesting topic, a topic that we can start discussing, but probably not end or conclude, because the business and societal environment in which we operate keeps shifting all the time. I think your essential point was the formal format is less relevant than the informal format of collaboration towards a common shared objective within a framework of shared values and ethics, within shared beliefs. I think your point is extremely well made. May I thank you for this, and may I congratulate you for an exceedingly good delivery. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Satya. Thank you, Mr. Balraman. And also thanks to Mr. Prasad, Ravi Shankar, and Narasimhan, and Mr. Said for joining us, Pankaj. And we want to make it a little interesting. That's why we brought in a conversation, the presentation in between the break where some questions can be asked. Please do share your view. Do you think it's the best way to move forward, or you think at the end of the session we'll get questions, because there are many views on that. And also thank all the viewers who watched the program. More than 1,840 people have watched this program live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and also our webcast. Thank you so much. Your feedback is very important. You have done that. So thanks, Mr. Satya. It's really, I know it's quite late now for you to be awake with us and share your insight. I think your point, what you brought out is, as Mr. Balraman said, outstanding. And this will be, they reached out to a large number of our viewers in the terms of article we'll be writing, we'll be sharing with you before we publish them in our internal digital magazine, which is read by more lakh of people. Thanks so much. Thank you all the participants, and thank you viewers. Till we meet again, bye-bye. Thank you also for joining the poll and the result. The result is only for the speaker and the organizers. You need not, it will not be shared with others, because the result has been anyway outstanding. Thanks so much, and good night till we meet again. Bye-bye. Stay safe and stay healthy, and look forward to seeing you soon again next episode of MMA, which I already shared with you on the 28th. Thank you so much, and good night to each one of you.
Thank you, sir. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Satya.
Good one, Satya. Thank you.
சார் சரி சரி சார், இந்த அனுப்பிச்சிடறேன் சார், உங்களுக்கு வாட்ஸ்அப் பண்ணுறேன் சார். நான் போடல சார். இல்லை, அது ஷேர் ரிசல்ட் கொடுத்தா மட்டும்தான் பப்ளிக்கில் வரும், இல்லைன்னா கோஸ்ட்டை மட்டும் தான் அதை பார்க்க முடியும். சரி, ஓகே. இப்போ இம்மிடியேட்டாக அனுப்புகிறேன் சார். தேங்க்யூ சார்.